All right, here we go. This is the System Failure Podcast, number 45. How you doing, Nate?
Hey, good, Brian. Number 45. We are really starting to get up some tidy sums here in terms of the number of episodes we put into the can. I'm looking forward to crossing the magical bridge and getting into the 50s. It's going to be awesome. Just give us another month or so, huh?
5 weeks.
Yeah, okay, more than a month. You're right. But still, I'm pretty excited. I thought that maybe around episode 50, when we started, I thought to myself, well, maybe by episode 50, we'll be consummate professionals. And I don't really know how professional I feel, but it's gratifying to be getting near some larger numbers. Feel like maybe the pod's not brand new anymore. So that's pretty exciting, man. Number 45. It's a nice little milestone.
Well, I think the podcast is getting better in some ways.
Well, we'll continue to try to up the quality as best we can as we go along. Eh?
All right.
Nothing else for it.
One thing in the name of improvement, well, I guess, we've talked outside the podcast about going to like open mic nights and fantasized about how that would improve one's, like public speaking or general oration ability. So there is one at Empire Comedy Club. I think it's like every week or every other week on Thursdays. But one person had like a great joke. Well, some people, ate shit and then others were funny. But one person had a good joke about how, you're supposed to call like the homeless, the unhoused now. And that does like absolutely nothing to improve the situation for the homeless. And man, if that's not like, a microcosm of how we deal with our political problems in this day and age. I don't know what is. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
Pretty good. That makes me think of comedian Dave Smith's joke about how he was born in the 90s. And so, as far as controlling language goes, there's that. Who was it that had the initial comedy bit? I can't remember, about the invective treadmill, where like a word starts out as as like a medical term, but then eventually becomes like an insult or a colloquialism, and then eventually it becomes bad to call people that, and so we have to just constantly be inventing new terms, but you're really describing a condition that's not enviable, so the term becomes like an insult or it becomes like offensive, and then you have to get a new term. We just keep going from term after term after term, and it's like it's like younger people don't realize, if you're like 19, right? You don't realize. When I was 19, I certainly didn't realize that. But that's what's happening, and that continuously labeling a never-ending river of words as offensive and moving on to a new word is just, when you get to be older and you're like 40s, you're like, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. That's silly. It doesn't help anyone. Exactly what like the joke says. It doesn't do anything. All it does is give some people conversational superiority over others so they can correct you. That's the real social currency here. So yeah, that is pretty good.
Yeah, well, retarded is the classic example, right?
Well, that's Dave Smith's jokes. He said, I'm up here on stage, I will use the word retarded because I'm from the 90s, and it was okay to use that word in the 90s, and we're not, going back and reinventing everyone. But I would never use the N-word as the N-word of his joke. I would never dream of it because it was not cool to say that in the 90s.
I don't know if the N-word's a medical term either.
No, yeah, that one has a little bit different history. But the idea of making certain syllables unutterable as if the syllables are magic and not the meaning behind the syllables is really the misguided part of this, right? It can't be that it's just that the words are, you have to actually back that up with some kind of an action. So similar, even though it was never a medical term, of course, it still doesn't do anyone any good. It doesn't fix the underlying the historical problems that fester beneath the surface of American society.
Yeah. Well, like the homeless problem, especially during the summer, there's a lot of homeless people around. They've got like this terrible posture, and they're on something, and they're walking around like zombies, and it's a pretty brutal sight to witness. And they're just gonna slap this unhoused Band-Aid on this like shocking and horrifying problem.
The thing when you have people are on the fentanyl and they're bent over at the waist, like they haven't bothered to lie down. They're still like standing, but they're like bent over at the waist. They're just completely out of it. You're like, man, these people are wrecked. Wow. Yeah. Well, that's pretty good. It makes me, the idea of going to open mic night, well, one, it would make us better on these mics for the weekly pod for our valued listeners. But then there's also the bit that Jimmy Carr had ages ago now, like probably 6 months to a year ago. He was on the JRE talking about how comedy, how the Jesus and his disciples comedy, he was comparing, Jesus, the ministry of Jesus with today's comedy, suggesting that today's comedy scene is the analog to the ministry of Jesus in Roman society, because you basically had a bunch of people listening to someone say the things that the state didn't want them to say, or that polite society say things that are out not quite allowed or radical. And so he compared, Jesus and his disciples and the people that would listen to his outdoor sermons to the comedy clubs of today, or to the jesters of the medieval courts, the person who's allowed to say the thing to power that power doesn't want spoken. And so that was interesting. So there's a couple of aspects of the open mic night that interest me, but I have no doubt that it would be a trial by fire, right? It's like a humiliation to get up. I mean, you saw the people that ate it, right? The open mics I've been to, when there's someone that's eating it, it's like you want them to succeed so badly, because the shame is that you can it's like thick in the air. You can almost cut it with a pair of scissors. And you're like, oh, the humiliation when people go up there and just bomb. Oh,
there was one old guy who had driven down from Orono, and he just kind of went up there and meandered. And the guy was giving him the light too, because he was out of time, but he just kind of carried on anyway, and it was hard to watch.
Deeply uncomfortable, eh?
Some other people really crushed it though. There was one black dude who was just up there crushing it, man. He was talking about how the Bloods and the Crips are the Republicans and the Democrats, and that dude brought the heat, man. He crushed it for 4 minutes. It was impressive.
Well, so will you be going back, or will you be jumping up on stage yourself, Brian, to undergo a trial by fire?
Trying to write jokes is hard work. Shane Gillis, he's the best. I mean, he just talks about how Donald Trump is funny and how his dad watches Fox News. He's not buying into the mainstream crap. I don't know. Shane Gillis is hilarious. He was on Kill Tony doing a Donald Trump impression.
I saw that too. That Adam Ray doing Biden, just walking around with mouth agape, staring around in wonderment.
Yeah, that's priceless. If you can do that kind of thing, that's incredible. But Shane Gillis is huge now.
He probably has the best Donald impression of any of the comedians currently practicing their craft, eh? I mean, he does a really good impersonation of the Donald.
Well, SNL really should have hired him because his his Donald is incredible.
Why did he get fired from SNL? What was the story? Do you recall? I don't recall exactly.
Well, they just went back and listened to his podcast.
Oh, he had some shocking things on there. Yeah.
They do get into it a bit.
Maybe if we're lucky, Brian, the pod we're recording right now can get us fired from one of our future gigs, if we play our cards right.
That would be incredible.
Yeah. Speaking of the Donald and Biden and the race that's currently ongoing, since we've last recorded, there's been even more political developments in what's really becoming a roller coaster of an election season so far. It seems that the Dems are going to ditch the Donald after all, despite the radio silence on that front and
ditch
the days.
Biden.
What did I say?
The Donald.
Oh yeah, sorry, the Biden. Yeah. The Donald. The Donald is definitely still running. So I don't know, Brian. What do you reckon? Are they going to install Kamala? I have to think so, but I wonder what you think. What are they going to do? What are the Dems' strategy going to be?
Well, the narrative was really building that they were going to get rid of Biden, and so it seemed crazy that there's this assassination attempt on Donald, and now Biden has COVID, and a lot of people are reporting that he's going to step down now. Mm-hmm. And so, what's the chicken and the egg here is what you got to wonder.
How so?
Is he stepping down? Would he have done this anyway? Is it because this assassination failed attempt that is the next play in the playbook now to have Biden step down? Although it seems like it's a little more ambiguous than that. Just more recently, it seems like maybe Biden is going to try to cling to power as much as possible. But it's interesting, Lester Holt is grilling, Biden in these interviews on CNN now, and all of the weight of the establishment's trying to get Biden to step down. But apparently Biden somehow has the political clout to still kind of do what he wants, which is pretty wild. Yeah, the delegates, the super delegates, and the delegates for the DNC are all pledged to Biden. And so he kind of has to agree to step down, or they're going to have to Article 25 him and remove him from office for being unfit. Those are the only two options. And so I think they'd really prefer to go with the former and not the Article 25. It's just, it doesn't look good for unity in the Democratic Party if there's a squabble over whether Biden's going to step down. So I think that... I think everyone is lining up and trying to get the old man to go ahead and
take his quote well-deserved bow and exile the stage before the shame becomes too much and it all ends in disaster.
Well, on the other hand, though, I just don't know who the Democrats are going to put up there that actually, like, you need like someone who's not an establishment shill to beat the Donald, right? Because he's just going to beat an establishment shill.
Right, you're going to need like Bernie, who was polling very favorably against the Donald in 2016 before he was squashed and replaced with the gargoyle Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gavin Newsom would be someone they could put out there. Of course, he's like destroyed the state of California.
Yeah.
And then like Michelle Obama seems like a logical enough conclusion.
She says she's not interested in politics, is what I've heard from her recently. But everyone always says that, and then they enter a political race. You know.
Well, at least she's like actually an Obama, and she could at least just run off the memory. Like people, they'll have memory hold the fact that Obama was not in fact a hope and change candidate at all, despite having run on that platform. And so she can at least appear to be progressive. I can imagine Michelle Obama pulling that off. But yeah, if it's going to be, I don't know, like anyone, like Hillary Clinton again or like Kamala, that would just be, I mean, Trump would destroy one of those candidates, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, just the picture of the Donald standing there with this, the iconic picture now with the American flag fluttering in the breeze behind him and the Donald's fist raised in defiance and the blood trickling down the right side of his head. I mean, that's just this election is now a lock for the Donald, in my view. There would have to be some kind of a major development for this race to go and be anything other than a landslide in favor of the Donald. And so I think that 2024 is a wash for the Dems. And so I think they're going to just let Kamala get destroyed by the Donald and then pivot in 2028. That's what I think. Let Kamala just get destroyed, and then Gavin Newsom does not want to run against the Donald in 2024 after this assassination attempt, right? It's gonna be a tough row for Gavin to hoe because he wants his political star to rise, and getting smoked by the Donald in 2024 isn't going to help him on that front. So I got to think that there's really no one that's going to want to run this year, except for Kamala. This is her only chance. She's not going to be vice president. So this is her chance to strike while the iron's hot, and of course she's going to get destroyed. But I think it logically has to be her. And furthermore, I think that all this is like it's too bad that the Democrats were able to get the creaking and tottering Joe Biden across the finish line in 2020. If they had just the Democrats pivoting from a labor funding to corporate funding should have been a losing strategy for the Democrats all along. Do you remember when Obama got all of those small donors? Like same with Bernie, they were out raising the corporate candidates with these small donations. Do you remember that? And then within a year or two after Obama got elected, they brought in Citizens United so they could up the amount of corporate money they were putting into the campaigns to compete with all these small donations from regular Joes. Like, in short, I don't think that the Democrats are going to be able to get away with what corporate America needs is the demolition of the middle class so that all that wealth can pad corporate profits. And I don't think the Democrats can ever hope to win with a candidate who's willing to oversee the destruction of the middle class and have just become one of these crazy South American societies where a few people live in splendor and luxury and everyone else lives in the favelas. Right? The Democrats are not going to be able to succeed doing that. And so it's interesting to me to see all of the corporate money flow to I've got all of these articles coming out this week about corporate money. And if all the corporate money is behind the Donald, I mean, he destroyed Hillary in 2016 with a fraction of her funding. But now all that corporate funding is going to the Donald, right? We got Elon Musk committing $45 million a month to a new pro-Trump super PAC. That's on wallstreetjournal.com. NBC reports that Timothy Mellon leads a huge month for Trump mega donors by pouring cash into the election. And obviously, J.D. Vance, the new nominee for vice president under the Donald, is one of these Peter Thiel guys, and he's got like all kinds of billionaire money behind him. So I feel like corporate America is behind the Donald now, and that he's just going to ride to victory. Which I think is awesome. The Democrats need to be punished for their failure to represent the middle and working classes, which is what they're supposed to be doing which is how American society was much more stable when we had a corporate party and then a party of the workers in the middle class. But having two corporate parties is completely unstable, and it's really turned America into an uninhabitable hellscape, with the zombies you mentioned wandering the streets because housing's so expensive. Like, we're just going to need the Democrats can only succeed running a candidate who's going to take that slider between corporate profit and the public good and move that a few notches back towards public good, like bring us back to some kind of a balance there.
Well, I think the Trump corporate money is like survivalist money. Like maybe we've talked about it on the podcast before, but you got your survivalists, which like Elon Musk is. Like he wants to.
In what sense is Elon Musk a survivalist?
Well, he wants to grow, the human population and wants to like expand to Mars and that kind of thing. And then, like, Bill Gates, thinks that the human population needs to be, like, reduced drastically.
I see.
And so Trump has, some corporate money and then probably some people's backing it as well. And then I don't know who's supporting Joe Biden. But, like George Clooney, bailed on Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And, the whole establishment's trying to get Joe Biden to quit. So he just has no backing, I think is what it is.
Well, I think that the whole working class has gone from supporting Democrats to supporting the Donald and Republicans now, which is a disaster for Democrat politics, like you're saying.
Yeah, well, J.D. Vance was talking about the failure of the ruling class in his, VP acceptance speech there at the RNC. And so it's pretty wild that the Republicans are now, like, talking about the ruling class. And, the Democrats don't do that at all.
Now, I'm rooting for the Donald to win this election, but I also simultaneously believe that the Donald's policies would be catastrophic. Right? They're going to hasten the massive economic crisis that's brewing if the economic crisis doesn't arrive prior to the Donald's likely a nomination in January. Like he's talking about slashing the corporate tax rate. I think the Donald had all of these anti-corporate, anti-establishment messages in 2016 and to a lesser extent in 2020. But with all this corporate money behind him, I got to think he's really going to be pivoting to doing what the corporations want him to do. So he'll have disastrous policies. But I really take the accelerationist position here. I think the sooner the Democrats can come to the conclusion that they're not going to be able. The only way they're going to be able to get votes is by safeguarding the existence of the middle class, and anything short of that isn't going to. They're going to need a Bernie Sanders type. They cannot cheat and use the bylaws of the DNC to deny Bernie or Bernie-like candidates the nomination, and expect that to be a successful strategy. It worked for the Clintons and it worked for the Obamas, and it worked in 2020 when, like I say, they delivered Joe Biden across the finish line, like the jailers delivering Hannibal Lecter to the courtroom on a dolly there with his mask on in that movie Silence of the Lambs. And it's really too bad. Like if the Dems had just run Bernie in 2016, we could be the timeline could be 8 years more advanced. So I really think that all of this gives me hope that we can eventually arrive at a place where the Democrats actually run Bernie Sanders-esque democratic socialist type candidates, the only kind that can, that can, just like in the wake of the Great Depression, when we had to have an FDR to bring in like socialist-esque policies to fix the country and avoid a communist revolution, by his own words, like the one that took place in Russia in 1917. But we need those similar kinds of democratic socialist policies to revisit America to keep just so our train can keep chugging down the track. And I just feel like the collapse of the Democrats is at hand here, which is very exciting for someone who's been so frustrated by the fecklessness of the aforementioned Dems for the better part of a decade now.
Well, you'd have to say that our two-party system is real stupid. And like in Europe, there's what you do is you vote for like a party rather than a candidate. Yeah. And like the establishment is like never going to go away. But if we could give more power to more far right and far left parties or whatever, and then kind of take the power away from like the central or the corporatists, and then the corporatists would have to concede some power. But in our crazy current system, they just kind of have to cram, Joe Biden down our throats or Donald Trump, which like neither option's really very exciting.
Well, the two-party system is stable. I mean, even if it doesn't make for great progress, it's stable, right? It just keeps the conversation within a certain range, and it's politically stable. But it's the opposite of politically stable when one party is going to do nothing and just point to the other party as some kind of a unique evil to try to scare people. All the Dems have is fear-mongering. They're corporate donors. They don't want to see Medicare for all. They don't want to see relief in housing prices. They don't necessarily even want to see inflation come down because this is padding corporate profits.
Well, it's crazy we've had to really live through the breakdown of the two-party system.
Yeah.
Although I guess the two-party system before was just mostly a sham. I suppose it always has been, but now it's like completely broken down.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that the two-party system was just a way to manufacture consent for whatever crazy foreign wars or corporate tax cut. Like there was but it was stable in like when we were kids. It's like the Clintons pioneering the acceptance of corporate money to replace that labor union money really destabilized the system. And that's when all of our trouble began with the, removing Glass-Steagall and omnibus crime bills that, put tons and tons of African-American people in jail and making student loan debt non-dischargeable in bankruptcy court, all kinds of just things that just set up the chessboard for a total fallout. And we could have a stable two-party system, and it wouldn't create rapid change to American society, maybe even at a time when rapid change is needed. But what really makes the two-party system unstable rather than stable is when you have one party as a wolf in sheep's clothing trying to pretend that they're doing something, right? But really, if one of the parties is fake, then now you have a problem. Now you have a ticking time bomb if their strategy is to fearmonger all the way to 10. And that seems to be what they're doing. It's wild stuff. That's what all the mentions of Project 2025 feel like to me. I just can't even go to the Wikipedia page and look at it because it's like now, because you're like the people in the news or Reddit is like, all right, hear me out. We got to sound the alarm. we got to ring the alarm bells, for the 700th time in the past 10 years. And who believes anymore that a possible Donald administration is some kind of a unique threat to our society or democracy or whatever. I just can't even dig in. It's just so unbelievable that they're going back to the hurricane siren again to make I just can't believe that they think that the strategy will work after having failed over and over and over again so far. I suppose it worked in 2020 though, Brian?
I think broadly speaking, the plan for Project 2025 is a plan about the Donald had like a hard time like appointing like the right people to carry out like his political will in his first presidency, and so really, I think Project 2025 is a plan to implement more of his political vision more effectively.
The Donald and Project 2025, it comes from the Heritage Foundation. It's like hundreds of pages, and it's just a bunch of policy suggestions. Isn't that right?
Maybe I should look into it. It comes from the Heritage Foundation?
Yeah, yeah. It's not related to the Donald's campaign. There are some things in there that the Donald probably would be likely to enact, and then there are other things that just there wouldn't. So it's just not even. Yeah, that's as much as I know about it, though. Like I say, looking under that rock, it's just I can't investigate another reason why the Donald's an existential threat. It's just we've been going to 5-alarm fire on this count over and over and over again since 2016, and it is the most tired routine that I can possibly imagine at this point.
All right. Well, anyway, like I guess it's a good thing about the two-party system that like one of the parties is collapsing under its own weight, and then the other one just has to be portrayed as a fascist. So that's like a wild paradigm. Although it does seem like it's coming to some kind of head or conclusion. 'Cause I don't know how we get back to like the old two-party paradigm after this.
In the lead up to the Civil War, it happened with the collapse of one party, the Whigs. Remember, the Whig Party used to exist. It was like the Republicans and the Whig Party. And the Whigs just completely collapsed and had to be replaced by the Democrats. Right? That's what happened in the lead up to the Civil War. And so I think that's what's going to have to happen again. We're just going to have to let the Democratic Party wither into either they pivot and start doing some Bernie Sanders-esque policies, or we got to replace them with a party that is willing to run a Bernie Sanders-esque candidate. And so I think that's what they got to do. I don't think the corporations. I think most of the Donald's donors, new corporate donors, really just looking to pad their bottom line. That's really all they care about, right? They want to cut to corporate tax rates. They want to be able to report higher quarterly earnings next quarter. I think that's what they're primarily concerned about here. So I think we could totally see the collapse of the Democratic Party as all the corporations rush to the Donald side, trying to bet on the winning pony. The strategy no longer makes sense for the corporate donors to back both ponies in this race, so they win no matter what. One pony has clearly come up lame and now needs to get the shotgun treatment like Big Brown in the Kentucky Derby, and so they're putting all of their dollars behind the pony that's obviously about to win. And so, man, my hopeful and optimistic take on this whole morass is that this will be the end of the line for the Democratic strategy of also accepting corporate dollars and trying to act like they're not, or trying to act like they are still going to behave as the guardians of the working and middle class, when that's just not happening at all. So, yeah, I really think this could be great. The Democrats their fate should have been sealed the minute they denied Bernie the nomination in 2016. And I can't believe they've hung on this long, but I'm hopeful that all this business with the Donald and the failed assassination attempt will bring about that end.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying last week where, the Donald, I think he wants to make corporations money, and so he is going to get that corporate backing. And then the Democrats they're the party of like controlling your speech, and like all the failures with like Bud Light and
right. Well, the DEI Democrats, right? They brought us the DEI instead of as an excuse in lieu of bringing us the Bernie Sanders sorts of policies we so desperately need to directly relieve the middle working classes.
Yeah, it was all well and good, but it seems like it's costing like Disney money now, and so.
Yeah. So what? Yeah, we're gonna see. Like they told us they made it embarrassing to be MAGA, right? On like Reddit, it was like, the only like a incel would want to would be involved in the MAGA movement, but and there is a certain level of cringe with the MAGA movement, that's for sure. But the ultimate victory of MAGA over the DEI version of the Democrats is exactly what the doctor ordered. So we can get rid of the DEI thing, get back to some hardcore Bernie Sanders, Democratic Socialist type policies, which are the only things that will preserve a middle class and keep it running in this country. You've got to have some kind of counterbalance to corporate power, or you'll just see corporations swallow up the entire country as they did in the late 19th century with the robber barons and the Gilded Age. It's only the democratic policies of FDR that prevent us from having a society that is as unequal as that. And here we are, a new Gilded Age.
Yeah, well, just to set the record straight, I did talk about Donald Trump a lot in the last podcast, but ultimately, I think, we're 99%ers on this podcast. And this whole business where we try to suss out just like who the fascist is, like, are you a fascist? Am I a fascist? Like,
everybody a fascist these days.
Is like really dumb.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're, the person working at the airport Popeyes is like not a fascist. I guess if the incels have been driven crazy enough to like shoot someone, they're probably not really fascists either. They just loaded up on, some crazy psychological, antidepressants and whatnot, and have been fed propaganda.
Sure.
And they're like way too over engaged, on the social medias and whatnot. And I don't know if like fascist is the right word to describe that.
No, fascist is the classic American enemy, right? It's like the 1945 Captain America, Superman fight Hitler. That's the communism. Like with the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union, they need a boogeyman, and that's the fascist. They need a boogeyman that's big enough to counterbalance the misdeeds done by the Democrats. Right, their total abandonment of any kind of like I said, Bernie Sanders-esque policies. Their total abandonment of that and their embrace of DEI is quite the betrayal. And so they need a boogeyman who is proportionally big enough to distract from that betrayal.
Well, yeah, which we don't really have, right? We don't have, like these skinheads marching up and down the square, looking for minorities to round up, right?
Yeah.
So like when people, like when the Donald Trump supporters are doing that, and I guess you see some crazy things on the internet, but you don't see that in real life, right?
Well, I actually did feel like I got a whiff of fascism during the COVID era. You remember when you had to like turn on the news to find out if the governor was going to let you go out of your house that day? That was crazy. Benito Mussolini's definition of fascism was a merger between the corporate body and the state. And like that's exactly what both the Dems and the Republicans are. they're both kind of fascistic. And when Benito Mussolini perhaps would suggest that both parties are just as equally fascistic, and that every accusation is an admission, right?
Yeah, well, of course, yeah, the only real fascism comes from the people in power.
Yeah.
And it's just really sad that, we call people, like, some MAGA person is a fascist. It's just really sad.
When I'll never forget being denied. I was in Europe, with Tracy during the COVID epidemic, and it was really we didn't have the proper. I only had the one J&J shot. I didn't have the multiple boosters that they wanted, so you get the green pass. So Trace and I were like, because we were Americans, we didn't have green pass, so we were kind of like second tier, and there were places we couldn't get into, and it really was like the whole idea of separating a society into different, into where one camp is less privileged than another and can't have access to things. Like every Democrat and every American, I think, when we were growing up in the 90s would agree, you don't stratify society like that and then privilege one group over another. It was really chilling to be singled out by the apparatus of power. I had never felt that before. As a Whitey Willoughby, white male, age 18 to 40, it never had happened to me until the COVID era. And I was like, oh man, yeah, it really is creepy to be singled out by power and excluded from restaurants or from tourist attractions. Yeah, it was and made to comply with mask mandates and other things that had zero scientific basis whatsoever. It was really stark. So it does. I do feel like there is fascism floating around. It's just that maybe both parties are equally culpable of it. It's not something that's unique to one of our two political parties, that's for sure. It's kind of like algebra. It cancels out of both sides of the equation and isn't really worth talking about in an election between the two parties. Yeah.
Well, fascism is like this response to fear, and so people got to keep their cool when some kind of terrorist attack happens or some kind of virus gets unleashed on us. But of course, it'll never happen.
I'm still seeing folks wearing masks today in public. I was at Willard Beach yesterday, and there was the bus stop by Willard Beach. There's just people sitting there with masks on, even now, summer 2024. And I saw some people out to eat at Via Vecchia last weekend. When the New Jersey ladies were here, there were some people in Via Vecchia wearing masks on, and it's like they must just enjoy wearing the mask. It can't be fear, right? Has people wearing masks still. I bet there's plenty of hypochondriacs who are, but you wouldn't be going out to eat if you were afraid. You must just like the mask as a fashion accessory, right? It can't be that you're worried about your safety, but also go out to eat, right? It can't be.
Well, as Joe Rogan says, it's the liberal MAGA hat.
Yeah. Well, that's what it was. It was the mark of compliance. It was the red armband of the Nazi Party. What if the thing is that makes you included in the group that isn't targeted by the fascists? It was the mask there. Super creepy. So before we move on from politics, Brian, there's one other thing we haven't mentioned, and that is the existence of Mr. RFK Jr. Like, what do you make of RFK? What do you make of the existence of RFK in this mix now that we've seen the total collapse of the Biden candidacy?
One thing I don't like, just all this crazy stuff about this Donald Trump assassination ploy. I've watched like a bazillion hours of YouTube and people talking about this and figuring out like what's going on and like what's up with this catastrophic, security failure that resulted in this. And I think it does. At least it's marginalized RFK from people's minds for the time being. And it's probably not good for RFK. It seems like the Donald's definitely going to win, especially if they continue to ram Biden down our throats. Maybe we should be hoping that the Democrats kind of get a reasonable candidate to take some of the votes from the Donald and give RFK a better chance.
The Dems could give RFK the nomination. He was a lifetime Democrat until a couple months ago. They could give him the nomination, but I think the corporate donors have got to be frantic to not let RFK take office because he's going to go and kick all of the corporate rubber stampers out of the regulatory agencies and possibly litigate the whole COVID regime, because there's, the RFK goes on about his long list of crimes committed by people in high places during the COVID era. I gotta think that corporations are going to do anything they can to keep RFK out of office, right? I mean, there's no way they're going to let him up for air.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who's BlackRock going to throw their money behind, right? I would say it's not the Donald, to go back to kind of the point I was making before.
So you think that the Donald would not get BlackRock money? Because I think he would. Well, why do you think that?
Well, BlackRock doesn't want the war in Ukraine to end, right? Because they want to buy up all their infrastructure and use it to make money. And Elon Musk just isn't interested in that kind of thing, would be my feeling.
So you think that the Donald will end the war in Ukraine, and that's going to make him unpalatable to corporations like BlackRock?
Yeah.
Is there anything else the Donald would do that's unpalatable to corporations, or is that going to be their only sticking point with him? I can't think of anything else. I agree about I think the corporations are going to be like, listen, we'll cut you some massive checks, but you got to not end the war in Ukraine. And I bet the Donald would do it.
Well, I think it's probably hard to fathom how much of a craven cash grab this, Ukraine business is for our military industrial complex. It's probably just impossible to wrap your head around as just, regular plebes who have to work jobs and stuff. So I think the war in Ukraine is probably a big deal. But I guess it's the only thing that really comes to mind off the top of my head. Interesting.
Well, I think hasn't the war in Ukraine ground to a stalemate at this point? Wouldn't we? I mean, isn't it basically? I mean, aren't all sides kind of just want to move on from that war eventually soon here anyway? I mean, I'm just saying maybe the corporations they must realize that they can't keep the war in Ukraine going forever. And so maybe they're willing to let that go in order to retain control vis-a-vis the Dems administration. Maybe. Puerile speculation on my point.
I think there's a lot more. There's a lot more Ukrainians we can use as cannon fodder.
Are there? I mean, you mentioned months ago that they're now enlisting people in their 40s.
The average age of the military is 43. Maybe they think that rag has been wrung dry, and so they'd be willing to get behind the Donald. It seems hard to imagine, but. I mean, I'm sure Elon Musk is donating $45 million a month to the Donald because he thinks he's going to get return on that investment, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, the Donald's proposed 15% corporate tax rate, I feel would make that money back for Elon in record time. Dropping the tax rate on corporations is something that I think BlackRock, I think they could all broadly get behind that.
I mean, ultimately, I'm sure it's easy to get all fired up about the Donald and with a crazy assassination attempt, as I was saying, but it probably really doesn't matter if the Donald gets elected. Or it's just the status quo is going to mostly continue. Or hopefully it would end the war in Ukraine, but I'm sure there'll be other problems too, and we'll lament that RFK got buried. With all this madness between Joe Biden and the Donald here, that we all forgot about RFK.
Well, what really matters to me is that the Democrats realize that burying the likes of RFK and burying Bernie Sanders is a losing strategy, that it can't pan out for them like it did in 2020 with the tottering Joe Biden. And so it really seems like it. And my only concern is, would corporate power be so concerned about the Donald's potential pullout of Ukraine that they would try to make this an interesting race? I think my prediction, which could be comically bad, is I think we're going to have more or less smooth sailing to a landslide victory by the Donald in November, and that Kamala Harris will be sacrificed. They'll just throw her to the wolves, and then hopefully the Democrats will pivot in 2028 to something more. They'll have to embrace populism on their side in the way that the Republicans have embraced populism under the Donald. Or not, we'll see. But I think that's the most hopeful path forward. So I think I would love to believe that what we're seeing is the final collapse of the strategy of burying the Bernie Sanders candidates and trying to shove corporate chills like Hillary Clinton down our throat. I mean, I'd like to think that's what we're seeing here. But only time will tell, I suppose, eh?
I mean, if it really is the last stand for that kind of for that style of the Democratic Party, or if this is really could be the end of the Democratic Party as we know it, you just have to imagine they're going to pull out all the stops. But it's just hard to imagine. If the war in the Ukraine is the only thing that matters as far as a sticking point for BlackRock or whatever, then yeah, it probably really doesn't matter if it's like the Donald versus someone else, or if it's, the Democratic candidate. So like, why would it matter so much?
That's what I'm thinking, that we've got a corporate status quo and we basically have one viable candidate at this point. And that it's just going to be a total victory. But we'll see. I wonder if there'll be any other October surprises in the months leading up to the tumultuous 2024 election. I don't know. I do think we have a brewing economic collapse, and so there's a big question about whether that's going to come before or after the election. We'll see. That could really shake things up. But I suspect that the powers that be on Wall Street will not want to pull the economy until after the election, just to make sure they get their guy in. So that's what I suspect we're looking at here. A massive. I suspect that Donald will get in, and his policies will speed the roller coaster over the hump, and we'll sail into our next financial crisis, on the Donald's next watch. But that's the way it looks from here right now. Who knows? We could be in for, as I say, more October surprises as the election season unspools. We are only in July. There's a lot of time left. The Democratic convention hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah, we'll have to see here.
Yeah.
All right, Nate, what should our listeners do if they want to send us an email?
All right. Well, if you do want to send us an email, as mentioned, why send your email to nop@substack.com. Let us know what you think of our crackpot theories. And if you want to read if you want to subscribe to the weekly newsletter, then you can hit up nop.substack.com and check out the latest and greatest there. This week's essay is all about selling your soul to the devil, infernal summonings, that should be titled. So head on over to nop.substack.com, check it out.
All right, I'll see you, folks.
Take care. Bye-bye.